On today's edition of Locked On NHL, the Rangers and Bruins heading in opposite directions, the Blackhawks and Oilers playing a surprisingly competitive overtime game, and the Kings and Canadiens late on the West Coast, all on today's show of Locked On NHL.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. I am Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers. That's my good friend and my co-host, the co-host of Locked On Penguins, Hunter Hodies. We want to thank everyone who's taking the time to make Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. Locked On NHL, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code Locked On NHL for $20 off your first purchase. Hunter, a whole lot to get to tonight. Light slate in the NHL last night, only a handful of games, but very interesting storylines. We'll start with the Rangers and Bruins, who are in similar positions, but look to be trending in opposite directions. We'll talk about the Oilers and Blackhawks game from two different perspectives, and then we'll tie a bow on the show, talking Canadiens and Kings. So at the outset, before we started recording, you and I both kind of agreed the same thing. JT Miller is helping the Rangers. It's probably not going to be enough to drag them into the playoffs, but they took a swing. They are actively trying to make something happen to improve their situation. Whereas the Bruins, I think the Bruins kind of see the writing on the wall and realize that burning more assets would be a dumb decision here.
That's what I'm wondering about, because you look at the standings right now for the wild card, right? Boston, 27, 23, and 6. They have 60 points. They're tied with Tampa Bay for that final playoff spot. But the thing is, the Lightning have 4 games in hand on them. So if they were to win all 4 of those games in hand, Nick, they would be 8 points up on the Bruins with the same amount of games played. If you're Don Sweeney, how are you going to add to this team in that situation? Yes, I understand right now you are tied with Tampa Bay for that final playoff spot. You look at the other wildcard spot, the Red Wings, they have been red hot as of late, 7 in a row. The coaching change has really helped, at least so far. 28, 21, and 5 overall. They have 61 points, but they also have 2 games in hand on the Bruins. How in good conscience are you going to add to this team where you already have bad depth issues? Jeremy Swayman, for as good as he is, he hasn't been at that elite level this year. Defensively, you're bleeding too many chances in your own zone. I just don't really know how you're going to add to this team. Yes, I know that's probably going to make David Pastrnak and Brad Marchand pretty upset, but again, man, I don't know how you are going to add to this team. I think with the way they have played this year, they're not very good. Even if they do make the playoffs as a wild card team, I think they're going to get bounced pretty early by one of the top 2 teams, whether it's Washington or whoever wins the Atlantic. I just don't think they're very good this year. And then with the Rangers, at least with Miller, 2 goals, 4 points in 3 games. It looks like the change of scenery has really helped him thus far. The Rangers, they've been playing a little bit better as of late. They're trying to make a push out of this. They still might get into the playoffs, but do I think they're going to do a lot of damage similar to the Bruins if they get in? I don't think so, just based on what we've seen from the Rangers this year. Obviously, a hot goaltender changes everything. We all know how great Shesterkin is, both in the regular season and especially in the postseason. But based on what I have seen so far, I still don't think a deep run from the Rangers is in the cards, even though Miller is at least trying to drag them in there.
So we'll throw it first to John of Locked On Rangers, and then we'll hit the Bruins right now.
So 2 of the more maligned New York Rangers come up with a big moment in this game. The Rangers tie with the Bruins 2-2, getting somewhat late in the third period, about 8 minutes to go, and you see Mika Zibanejad hit Chris Kreider in stride. Just a beautiful short-handed goal. Nice to see those 2 come through in the clutch. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is the continued impact that JT Miller is having on this team. No points in this game, 4 points in the first 2 games combined, but his play, his physicality, his leadership are all showing up in a big, big way. The first goal that was scored by the Rangers, that was all JT Miller. And credit to Panarin getting the puck from Mika Zibanejad and converting on his opportunity. But that entire thing was set up by JT Miller, getting into the offensive zone like a bat out of hell on the forecheck, just absolutely putting a big hit on his guy, forcing the Bruins into a turnover. That's big stuff right there. And the Rangers had to win this game. They got the win. And onward and upward, 2 more games before the break.
So for the Rangers, who are in a weird spot because of that terrible stretch they had back in December where they went 5-15 for most of the early stretch of the season, moving Zibanejad to the wing has helped the last few games. He's been more noticeable. He's had less responsibility, and it's kind of let him play a little freer. The counterpoint to that is their bottom six is really ugly on paper. Last Saturday against the Bruins, it took them till, I want to say, the 12-minute mark of the second period for anyone in the bottom six to register a shot on goal. So it's a real question going forward. I know there's been a little bit of conjecture as far as the Rangers go looking at adding a third-line center to keep Zibanejad on the wing. The problem is you're really going to burn assets for a rental center on a team that, at best, if you look across all the models, whether it's our friends at FanDuel or if you look at one of the proprietary statistical models, the Rangers' most favorable forecast is a 40% chance to make the playoffs right now. That's not exactly the most enticing environment to trade, but based on the way Miller came together, I do think there's a bit of heat on Chris Drury for this team to make the playoffs in spite of that. So it wouldn't surprise me if they went out and got a third line center. Now, there's not exactly a whole lot of great players out there at this trade deadline. The most notable ones have already been moved. I just don't think it's a great idea.
Yeah, and honestly, like, you look at third line centers around the league, Nick, around the trade deadline, those don't come cheap. Like, you're usually looking at, a pick and a prospect, heck, sometimes a pick, a prospect, and a player. Sometimes these third line centers, go for a first plus. Like, that's how much GMs value those type of players at the deadline. So with where the Rangers are this year, do you really want to burn, as you said, more assets when they've done that a few years in a row? You got that big deal with Kane a couple years ago, Tarasenko. Last year, you went all in a little bit more. And then this year, you made the Miller trade to try and spark this core group, even though it still might be a bit too late with them, considering what they've shown this year and what they've shown since coming to New York. Does it really make sense to keep going all in? Because if they do, this is Chris Drury trying to save his job. Like, if they don't have, in my opinion, like a really strong end of the season, I think he could get canned at the end of this year. I mean, I think that's the main reason why he made the Miller trade, was because he knows his job is on the line, especially when the owner decides to wake up and do something with James Dolan. So I'm curious to see if they do go down that road. All I'll say is this for the Rangers. They're trying to make it interesting. We'll just see if they can continue this decent stretch of play here after that nice win against Boston. Zibanejad had a nice play last night. Kreider had a nice finish shorthanded. They got to get Kreider going, Nick. I think that's another big thing for the Rangers this year. He has not been nearly as good this year compared to last year.
Yeah, I was doing the math this morning because I do a daily update for the playoffs, and they need to play 620 points percentage hockey the rest of the way. That 23, you got to win 23 of your final 30 games, 22 of your final 29. That's really steep. We're going to throw it to Ian of Locked On Bruins for the Boston side of things.
The Bruins on Broadway reviews are in, and they're not great. This is Ian McLaren, host of Locked On Boston Bruins. And with a lead heading into the third period in New York City on Wednesday night, the Bruins could not hold on, losing 3-2 to the Rangers, a team that's chasing them in the playoffs, on a Chris Kreider shorthanded goal. Now, Don Sweeney, general manager of the team, was on the TNT broadcast, continuing to discuss the two paths forward for this team, whether or not they want to go in and add some pieces or whether they will sell and retool a bit. And by failing to pick up a couple points against a team behind you in the standings, it's increasingly looking like the retool option is where they should go at the very least.
It's a real challenge because Don Sweeney they made their bed. They have burned so many draft picks over the years. And look, you're not going to trade those kicks at the can. They had the best regular season in the history of the format 2 years ago. We're not that far removed from that. You did lose a lot of guys, though. You lost Pasta, you lost Krejci. That alone, most teams don't come back from that. You lose two players of significance to the degree of Bergeron and Krejci, you full-on rebuild. But you had McAvoy, you had Swayman, you have Pasta. That's enough to justify keep throwing kicks at the can, but again, that also forces you to do things you probably don't want to do, like the Zadorov contract, like the Lindholm contract. They and the Rangers are in similar boats where their next wave of guys, the Rangers, it's Shesterkin, Fox, and I guess you would say Lafreniere is in that group of the next wave, but like that group is too good to justify entirely giving up on the old guys, but Boston's reaching an inflection point here. At a certain point,
it's time to pay the piper, buddy. Like that's really what time it is in Boston. It's time to pay the piper. And you look at some of their, young players in Providence, they really don't have a lot down there that can really come up and make an impact, Nick, right now. Like legitimately, like you look at that roster, who down there is going to come up and make a major impact for this Bruins team down the stretch? It's why I think Don Sweeney needs to retool a little bit and sell at this deadline, because they're not very good this year. And if you're just going to burn future assets and miss the playoffs, then what are you doing? And then, Nick, they really have to figure out, what are you doing with Marchand after the season? I think people forget that he is a pending free agent after this season.
Hey, man, for a minute there last week, that was a very big topic of conversation amongst Oiler fans was, why don't we go get Brad Marchand? And like, aside from making the money work, the Oilers already have 5 left wings for 4 spots, and trading for another one only adds to the logjam. We're going to take our first break of today's show. We come back, we're going to talk about the Oiler Blackhawk game. We're going to stump for Connor Bedard, who is unfairly being maligned, and a whole lot more on this edition of Locked On NHL, so be sure to stick around. Looking for tickets to your next big event, whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Gametime Picks, it's never been easier. Let me explain. With Gametime Picks, the app does all of the hard work. It curates the best deals, and you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. Tonight, after I record with Hunter, I will be going to Devils Golden Knights with some of my friends to celebrate my birthday. Looking forward to seeing Jack Eichel for the first time as a Golden Knight. Haven't seen him in person since he was on the Sabres. It's been a minute. The curated deals with Gametime made it super simple to find great tickets at a great price. And most importantly, the seat view feature is a game changer. Before we bought our tickets, we could see the view, which end of the ice, the angles. So that way we know what we're walking into. And the best part, you are covered with Gametime's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out with Hunter and I on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. So, Hunter, it was the Battle of the Connors, the first overall Connors last night, Bedard and McDavid. And we'll start with the Oilers' perspective because as Locked On Oilers host, I feel that's my obligation when the Oilers are topical. The Oilers have been playing very mediocre hockey for a week and a half, and they keep winning. So on the episode of Locked On Oilers for Thursday, I laid it out very simply. You can be glass half full and say they're not playing well, but they're still winning games, which is encouraging. Or you could be glass half empty and say they're not playing well against bad teams. They went to overtime back-to-back nights against the Blues and the Blackhawks. That's not exactly the 96 Canadian Olympic team. It's a real conundrum here. And there's conjecture that there's a bug going around the room. It knocked Ekholm out of the game last Saturday against the Leafs, but the energy's not great. The attention to detail has been not great. They haven't been getting off to great starts for like a month now. They are in the Four Nations break, thankfully, so hopefully that reset helps down the lineup. Their big fish are going to Four Nations, so it's not as much of a reprieve. I'm sure Leon's happy he's not representing Germany in this tournament, so he can get a nice trip out of it. But the Oilers might have issues, but at the same time, if they keep winning, it's hard to complain. In a league with so much mediocrity, if you keep winning, I guess you kind of have to just smile.
Hey, they needed this break. Like you said it, they haven't been playing that well lately. So getting a chance for a lot of these players to reset, I think is going to pay huge dividends down the line when they come back from this break and they really enter the stretch run. Because you look at the standings right now, this is really fun, especially in the Pacific. Edmonton, 4 points up on Vegas, 54 games played for each. You have LA at 62 points. So it's really, in my opinion, just a battle of who is going to get first between Vegas and Edmonton. If Edmonton gets first, they avoid that 2-3 matchup where they've kind of been in that spot for a lot of these years. And, it feels like we've seen LA Edmonton 5,000 times these last few years. But this time, if you get that top seed in the Pacific, you get one of the wildcard teams. I don't think you're going to catch Winnipeg this year, in my opinion, for the top seed in the West. But heck, right now, if the playoffs were to start right now, if you look at the standings, we would get Edmonton, Colorado in the first round. Buddy, sign me up for 7 games of Nate Mack and Connor going at it. Please. I need a playoff series like that. Bouchard versus Makar, it would be, please, inject it in my veins. But more with Edmonton, you saw, even when they weren't playing well these last 2 games, the big dogs are right there, Nick. Connor McDavid knifes through the Blues in overtime, delivers a disgusting pass for the winner. Boom, goes in the back of the net. Connor's 1 of 1, man. That's a play that only Connor McDavid can do. And then last night against Chicago, they don't play well. You had Alec Martinez tie it, but then they still are able to win it a bit later with another clutch goal by the Oilers. So even though you're not playing that well, you're still finding ways to win. You would much rather take that than lose those games and have fans thinking, okay, are we taking a step back here? Like, what's going on? I think they're going to be fine coming out of the Four Nations face-off. Still a bona fide Stanley Cup contender. Also curious to see what the front office does at the deadline, because I still think they could use maybe another top 4 defenseman in that lineup.
Agreed on both counts. And I want to pivot to Connor Bedard now, because that Blackhawks roster is very poor. Objectively, going player by player, it is a very weak roster. And I understand that it's easier for the talking heads to just pick one guy and central that. I mean, I saw the Bruce Boudreau segment on TSN. It was the entire second intermission report last night on TNT down here in the States. And I understand frustration that Bedard hasn't taken a step forward. The sophomore slump is very real right now, but he's one guy. He's 19 years old. There are maybe 2 other players on that team, and Seth Jones and Alex Vlasic you feel reasonably good about. Soderblom was good last night, but goalie, different part of the conversation. Harping on Bedard going for a line change early and not forechecking and throwing his body around, you're missing the point. This team is bad no matter what Connor Bedard does. Singling out the team's only above average to borderline quality player because he doesn't play with energy and doesn't have an attention to detail. The team is terrible. What would you like him to do? Score 4 goals a game? Because that's the only way the Blackhawks are going to win anything. They are not a talented team, and harping on a kid's 2-way game on what's going to win 25 games, it's maddening. I feel like I'm crazy. Why are we talking about the roster? I had to
mute the TV last night when that segment came on. Like, literally, and I try not to mute the TV when intermissions come on, because last night I'm doing my dishes, I'm in the other room, but I can hear the TV a little bit. And when I kept hearing a little bit of that, I literally had to stop doing my dishes, go in the other room and mute this, because I'm like, what are these guys talking about? Like, you look at the lines right now, Nick, for Chicago. Connor Bedard is playing with Ryan Donato and Landon Slager. Newsflash, people, I had no idea who Landon Slager was before last night. I know 99.9% of players in the league. I'm pretty confident saying that. I have no idea who that guy is. So people that keep picking on Connor Bedard, what else do you want him to do? 15 goals, 46 points in 53 games. Considering that Chicago is 16-31-6 this season, I would say him being at almost a point per game is a pretty major success for how bad this Blackhawks team is. And another thing, Nick, I don't think enough people talk about how poor of a job Kyle Davidson has done as general manager. Yes, I understand. This is a team in a major, and I mean a major rebuild. But I don't think he really knows what he's doing. That is a team that I call probably 5 times a day to see if you can get a player out of there, one of their useful players. I know their lineup is not very good, but that's still a GM that I will be calling every day, considering that I just don't think he knows what he's doing a lot with player acquisition, player management. I will say, you did leave out Teravainen. He's been pretty solid this year, 11 goals, 36 points in 53 games. Donato, he at least has 16 goals, but again, is he a top-line winger? No. He's a fine third-line, middle 6 forward. Like that's best case, I think, for him. Teravainen, fine middle six player as well. Tyler Bertuzzi, he's at least been okay this year, 17 goals, 28 points in 53 games. But outside of that, man, again, there's just not a lot on this team. And heck, usually Donato and Teravainen, they're usually centers. Right now, your top two centers are Bedard and Dickinson. Teravainen and Donato have been playing a bunch of wing this year for Chicago. So that goes to show, man, how poor this roster is.
And Bedard's adjusting to playing center too, if you'll recall. Last year he was playing on the wing mostly to ease him in. So there's a lot to unpack there. I probably want to write about that in all honesty, because I think it's an interesting conversation. We're going to take one more break on today's show. When we come back, we'll tie a bow on our Thursday show with a Canadiens and Kings conversation after their game last night. So be sure to stick around. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out with Hunter and I on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL, where we are breaking down the Wednesday night slate. It was a light slate. Generally, the NHL does this where the TNT slate is basically all that's on. There might be one or two stragglers out to kind of give them a major spotlight. And on the West Coast, I was mostly tuned into the Oilers. I was mostly tuned into Oilers Blackhawks. I had Kings Canadiens on, but I was mostly watching the Oilers. The thing that jumps out to me about the Kings every time I watch them is they are a really good defensive team. And the one thing they desperately need, they need Kevin Fiala and Adrian Kempe to get going offensively. Because, Fiala's a 40-goal guy, and he's probably their best goal scorer, I would say. Kempe, when he's been healthy, has been a 30, 35-goal guy. When you play elite defense like that, it doesn't take a lot to score. Doughty has been very good since returning to the lineup, which is interesting. It'll be curious to see if he makes the Four Nations face-off roster as a replacement for Pietrangelo, who's been dealing with a nagging injury as well. But the Kings they are probably stuck as far as their trajectory, but they're not bad. They're pretty solid most nights.
They've been better than I thought they would be this year. Yeah. They're going to make the playoffs. There's no doubt in my mind.
For sure.
But the biggest question, once again, is can they win a round? Because in all likelihood, you're going to get one of two teams, Edmonton or Vegas. So, yeah, we've already seen Edmonton, LA a lot. Vegas, LA, I would still take Vegas when Vegas is fully healthy. LA is going to need a lot of their top dogs to really ball out if they want to win that series. It is fun seeing Drew Doughty these last couple of years, Nick, really turn back the clock. He has been a lot of fun to watch these last couple of seasons. And if you're asking me, I do think he's going to replace Pietrangelo if Pietrangelo isn't going to play in the Four Nations face-off. Doughty, he's been playing since coming back 23, 25, 27 minutes a night. He's left off where he was last year, honestly. He's been really good in those minutes too. And you mentioned it with how stingy they are defensively. They are the stingiest team in the league when it comes to suppressing chances. They are elite in that regard. And also, Darcy Kemper has given them really good goaltending this year. They're finally getting some really solid goaltending. I feel like that's been an issue for them in years past. But one thing outside of what you mentioned with Fiala and Kempe, they need another scorer. I really believe that. I think if they can get another scorer that can play in their middle six to potentially, one of their top two lines, I think that can go a long way to them potentially winning a round, if not two, if they get the right draw in the second round. But so if I'm Rob Blake in the Kings front office, that's what I'm looking for at the deadline.
Agreed. We're going to throw it to Eddie of Locked On Kings real quick for the LA perspective. They are a fascinating team in the way they're assembled because Kopitar is still probably their best player, even though he's, 35, 36 years old. Doughty has been great since coming back, Kind of reminds me of when I was a kid and Roger Clemens wouldn't come back until July because he didn't want to do spring training and he only wanted to throw 50 to 75 innings for the whole year. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting from this, that Doughty feels great that he hasn't played hockey for the first 4.5 months. So he's just got more gas in the tank. At that age, it's really hard to ramp back up night after night after night. You think about depreciating returns, your body as you get older, it starts to get like an iPhone where the longer you have it, the worse the battery life gets. And you can't maximize the full recharge anymore. That's kind of how Drew Doughty probably feels at this phase of his career. So limited run will help him. And real quick to turn it over to the Canadians, I am at a loss trying to understand what's happening in the East at this point. Last week when we were doing the show, Montreal was in the midst of a nice little winning streak and had really kind of stabilized a position. Now we're sitting here. Detroit's the hot team. I can't make heads or tails of what's going to happen. None of these teams inspire confidence at all.
The Islanders have won 8 of their last 9 games. Where in the heck did that come from? Literally, they have been so bad for most of the season. Oh, we're just going to rip off a 7-game winning streak, lose Matt Barzal potentially for the rest of the season. Patrick Waugh, really weird update on him because when he was asked if he would come back before the end of the regular season, he said he's not sure. So there's a chance that injury could have him miss the rest of the season if it's really bad. But then they go out, they beat Vegas right after losing him. They've won 8 out of 9. They're still not in a playoff spot right now. But then you get into the question with them, does Lou Lamoriello now want to stand pat at the deadline and instead of not selling when it looked like he was easily going to sell as early as, a couple of weeks ago, honestly? So you have that going on. Detroit is in the midst of a 7-game winning streak. Tampa Bay is still sniffing around. Boston's not playing well, but they're still in the race. Columbus just lost Marchenko indefinitely with a broken jaw. The Rangers, they've won 6 of their last 10 games. The Canadians, though, they've lost 7 and 10. Heck, Nick, even the Penguins, and yes, I know the Penguins are not very good this year, but I'm one of the hosts of Locked on Penguins, so I have to say this on the national show. They're 2-0-1 in their last 3 games. They got 2 more games before the break this week against the Rangers and the Flyers. If they're able to win both of those games, that's a tall task considering how the Penguins play on the road, they'll be 4-0-1 heading into the break and feeling at least better about themselves standings-wise than they were about a week ago, where they were basically dead last almost in the conference. I know right now when you look at the standings, Buffalo, that 49 points, Philadelphia's at 53, but the Penguins, they were literally right there at the bottom with Buffalo. So curious to see how this race is going to shake out. I still have no idea who's going to get these wild card spots, man. It's going to be a hilarious finish.
It's really I don't know what it means. That's generally what has me so perplexed. Is so most of the time I can kind of piece together an idea as to why something is happening. Last year no one was that good and Washington got in by default. This year, you got like 7 teams who all have a realistic shot of being that second wild card. If they can just string together 2 good weeks, if you can string together a 6-3-1 stretch over a 10-game window, you're going to make some noise in this conference where no one is that good. No one. I mean, like on paper, you would probably say the Rangers are the most talented of those teams, but like, what's that good for? If you can if you go 5-15,
I will say, I think
what does it matter?
2 playoff matchups almost locked in the East, and I say almost because things can change. As of right now, it looks like we are probably going to get Carolina, New Jersey in the first round because I don't think either of those 2 teams are going to catch the Capitals down the stretch here, which, by the way, sign me up for Carolina, New Jersey if both teams are fully healthy going in. That will be fun. And as of right now, and this can change, we may very well get Toronto, Ottawa in the first round. Buddy, I need the takes. Please give me an insane playoff series between those 2 teams. I need it for content purposes.
It would be very funny if Ottawa ended their playoff drought and beat the Leafs in the first round and sent them into a tailspin. It would be funny from a narrative perspective. Unfortunately, that's generally all we have to look forward to, especially if your team's not going to make the playoffs. If the Rangers don't make the playoffs, the Oilers coverage will be fun, but like I'll be just rooting for chaos if the Rangers aren't in. But that'll do it for today's edition of Locked On NHL. If you guys could be so kind, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple or Spotify, leave a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell. Hunter and I will talk to you guys next Thursday.